You all for being here. I appreciate it. And, you know, representing New Hampshire, northern border is pretty important to us. And I'm not sure if you've been asked this question yet, but one of the directors of National Intelligence, James Clapper, has identified drug trafficking, obviously, as a major transnational organized crime. In my state, we're seeing a heroin epidemic, and I know a lot of that's coming over the southern border. So what's the biggest issues that we're facing on the northern border, and how can you help me understand how's the information sharing with Canadian authorities? Because that's where my local law enforcement and my state police and even the federal officials that work in New Hampshire would be working with on the Canadian side. Whoever's best to take that question. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. Well, one of the with specifics to heroin, you're right. We are seeing heroin that's coming up through Mexico, and the intelligence that we're developing and from our ongoing criminal investigations and our closed investigations is that we're seeing either precursor chemicals or heroin coming from China. It's being imported into Mexico under the control of the cartels. The cartels are using the existing smuggling networks to get them into the United States through the southwest border, and whether those smuggling networks are, the smuggling networks are used to smuggle anything. So whether it's people or whether it's drugs, the cartels have control of the networks and the pathways, and they're using that to get heroin into the country for either ultimate consumption here in the United States, or in some cases on into Canada as well. And one of the things that we were talking about was our ability and our need to make sure that we do everything that we can across all levels of law enforcement, whether it's federal, state, or local law enforcement, or in my particular neck of the woods, even tribal law enforcement, and international law enforcement as well, particularly with our Canadian counterparts on the Canadian side of the border. Where we have the biggest issues in my particular AOR, the Messina or Rouse's Point area, we use our border enforcement security task forces as a mechanism to share information back and forth with our Canadian counterparts. So we actually have cross-designated. We've given essentially Title 19 or Customs Authority, basically making state and local law enforcement designated customs officials, but also we're able to do that with Canadian local law enforcement officials as well. And then they can come and work the networks on this side of the border. So that the idea here is to open up information sharing, work the cases together, and instead of not only trying to remove the U.S.-Canadian border as a potential barrier to law enforcement, in some cases we're even actually able to use it to our advantage. So we understand it's a problem. Heroin seems to be on the rise, but one of the things that we think is the best way to conduct to identify, disrupt, or dismantle these transnational criminal organizations, no matter what commodity they smuggle, whether it's heroin, whether it's cocaine, or whether it's marijuana, or firearms for that matter, is to identify the scope of the organization in the source countries, the transit countries, the destination countries, and work together with law enforcement at all levels to share the information and work the cases.
So I get all that, just thinking about how do we drive up the price of heroin? Because one of the problems we have right now with heroin is it's so cheap. Obviously, the more we can make it tougher for them to transport this stuff over, it's so cheap that some people are addicted to prescription drugs, they go over to heroin, and it's really fueling this huge public health epidemic, not just in New Hampshire, it's across this country. I mean, do we need to give you bigger tools? What do we need to give you to help you to drive up the price to really come down on the people transporting heroin?
One of the things that we look at in any of the drug trade, and whether it's the heroin, and I should have also mentioned before that one of the newer trends that we're seeing with respect to heroin is the heroin laced with the fentanyl, which really
Yeah,
becomes
and
the deadliest part
like
of the
heroin on steroids, basically.
Absolutely, ma'am. Almost as with any business model, I think that if we can be more effective at reducing the supply, then that would drive up that would be one way to drive up the price. Another thing that we're trying to do is with almost every enforcement program that we have at Homeland Security Investigations, there's also a public outreach or a public service announcement message that goes along with it. So if we do have a particularly big search warrant where where there's a big seizure or a big arrest or a big sentence, we try and get out to the public that hey, if it's the kids that are using the heroin laced with fentanyl, to get out there and say, look, there's some you don't know what you're using, what the impacts are on you. So not only did we just conduct this investigation and make this arrest, but parents, this is why it's important that you don't use it, because you don't.
Yeah,
you
we've
have to
got to
know the
do a
dangers.
better job overall with that. I have a question about, in terms of Canada, as I understand it right now, and I'm not sure, whoever the best person to answer the question, I'll just field it. Right now, as I understand it, Canada doesn't have a system in place to screen inbound airplane passengers against the terrorist watch list. And so they're moving toward the capability. Is this true? And if so, those on the terrorist watch list can presumably enter Canada on an airplane. Is that true? Who knows about that? And can you help me understand that? Because I'm really worried about, we've got these foreign fighters that have gone to obviously Syria, Iraq, Yemen. Some of them are Canadians. We've had some Americans too. But, Canada's we have a great relationship with Canada. And so if you can get to Canada without getting through the watch list, it's really not that hard to get to the United States of America. So what are your thoughts on this problem?
I don't know if they have direct access to the U.S. government watch list and that they screen against that directly, but they have a similar system that we do of screening airline passengers against the airline reservation systems and the airline manifest before that person comes into that country. We work very closely with them, and we identify similar approaches to how we screen that. We call them rules, and we set rules against how we scrub that data and how we identify national security or any other types of concerns. We do joint rule creation, we do rules exchanges, and we have certain protocols in place that when certain rules fire, we'll exchange information and ask each other country about additional information.
Do you know if they have the equivalent of our terrorist watch list? What are they checking their passenger lists against? Do you know the answer to that?
It's against their own systems and their own lists. So they do, I believe, have a national security list. They have customs records. They have immigration lookouts. They have access to the Interpol lost and
So can I
stolen
ask you a
databases.
question? Just when you're thinking about a friendly neighbor like Canada, why couldn't we join forces on some of that in terms of terrorist watch lists information? I know we do information sharing, but it seems to me that we've got some if we can't trust the Canadians, we're in trouble. Any thoughts on that?
We don't own that information, so it really wouldn't be ours to exchange with them. But as consumers and users of it, we would certainly welcome access to any additional sources of information.
Maybe I'm asking that of the wrong person, but I think it's something. I serve on the aviation. I'm the chairman of the aviation committee, and I think this is perhaps a question I should direct to TSA or something.
And just one final point. If somebody does fly into Canada and drive across the border, we run the same database checks and the same watch list checks at the land border as we do in commercial aviation. They're the same systems and the same databases that we're
Good.
checking.
So you'd catch it there.
Correct.
Catch an individual there if they presumably were on our list, even if Canada didn't catch it.
Correct.
Okay, great, thanks.